The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat outside the dusty roadside diner, casting erratic shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 17. It was just past midnight in the forgotten stretch of Nevada desert, where the wind whispered secrets through the sagebrush, and the air hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and sun-baked earth. Inside, the place was a relic, faded red booths scarred by years of spills, a jukebox humming a forgotten country tune, and the faint sizzle of grease from the grill that hadn't seen a real rush since the mining boom faded decades ago. Behind the counter stood Lena Harper, her apron tied a little too tight around her ample frame, wiping down the formica surface for the third time that hour. At 32, Lena carried the weight of too many shifts and too few smiles, her curves a map of the life she'd pieced together after her dreams of leaving this nowhere town dissolved like morning mist. The door chime rattled like a warning bell as the last patrons shuffled out, a rowdy group of truckers who'd laughed too loud and tipped too little. One of them, a burly man with a beard like tangled wire, paused at the register, his eyes lingering on Lena with that familiar leer. "Hey, sweetheart," he drawled, sliding a crumpled 10 across the counter. "You ever think about ditching this dump? A girl like you? Well, maybe if you lost a few, you'd catch a real break." His buddies snickered from the doorway, the words landing like punches to her gut. Lena's cheeks burned, but she forced a tight smile, her hands trembling as she made change. "Drive safe," she muttered, watching them pile into their rigs, engines roaring to life and kicking up gravel that pinged against the windows like accusations. Alone now, the diner felt smaller, the silence pressing in. Lena leaned against the counter, her reflection in the darkened window, a blurry outline she barely recognized. She'd heard it all before, the whispers from high school, the pitying glances from family, the endless cycle of feeling invisible yet judged. Tonight, it hit harder. A tear escaped, tracing a warm path down her cheek as she whispered to the empty room, I haven't felt wanted in so long." The words hung there, raw and unguarded, until the low rumble of a motorcycle engine cut through the night like a thunderclap. Headlights pierced the gloom, sweeping across the diner's facade as a lone Harley pulled up to the curb. The bike was a beast, chrome gleaming under the moon, its pipes scarred from countless miles. The rider killed the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the creak of his leather jacket as he swung a leg over and approached the door. He was broad-shouldered, mid-40s, with salt-and-pepper hair tied back and a face etched by sun and stories. Deep lines around eyes that had seen too much. Jax Harlan, though she didn't know his name yet, paused at the threshold, his boots heavy on the welcome mat. He'd been riding for hours, chasing ghosts from a promise made 20 years ago in the heat of a desert war, a vow to a fallen brother. "Watch over the lost ones, Jax. Be the shield they never had." That oath had pulled him from one scrape to another, binding him to a crew of outcasts who called themselves the Iron Vow, a family forged in fire, loyal to the bone. Jax pushed the door open, the chime mocking the tension. Lena straightened, dabbing at her eyes, forcing her waitress mask back on. "We're closing in 10, she said, voice steadier than she felt. He nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter, his presence filling the space like a quiet storm. "Just coffee, Black, and whatever's left of that pie." As she poured, steam rising in lazy curls, he glanced up, catching the redness in her eyes. No pity there, just a steady gaze, like he knew the shape of hidden wounds. The diner clock ticked louder in the pause, the outside wind rattling the panes. They talked in fits and starts, the way strangers do when the night strips away pretenses. Jax shared fragments of his road, lost comrades, the weight of unspoken regrets, while Lena poured out hers, the words tumbling like rain after drought. "People look at me and see nothing worth keeping," she confessed. her voice cracking as she plated the pie. "Like I'm too much or not enough. I serve 'em all, smile through it, but inside it hollows you out." Jax listened, fork paused mid-air, the pie's cherry filling glistening like fresh blood under the fluorescent lights. He'd seen that hollow in mirrors, in the eyes of brothers who'd given everything for a cause that chewed them up. When she finished, the diner empty save for them, Jax set down his fork. The moment stretched, the jukebox clicking off into silence. He leaned forward, his voice a low rumble, roughened by years of wind and smoke. "Lena," he said, using her name like he'd known it forever. "You ain't too much. You're the kind of strong that holds worlds together, the kind that don't break even when they try to bend you." She froze, breath catching as he whispered the rest, words meant only for her. "And darling, you're wanted. Right here, right now, by someone who's ridden through hell to find his way back to honoring what's real. Let me show you." It wasn't a line. It was a promise, echoing the one that had chained him to his path, a vow to stand as shield for the overlooked. Lena's eyes widened, a spark igniting in the dim light, the first real warmth she'd felt in years. She glanced at the clock, then at the door, the weight of the night shifting. With a decisive flick she flipped the open sign to closed, the lock clicking like a heartbeat resuming. Outside, Jax's bike waited, a silhouette against the stars, but inside, something new stirred. A fragile alliance born of shared scars, hinting at roads untraveled and loyalties yet to be tested. The desert wind picked up, carrying the faint howl of distant coyotes as Lena stepped from behind the counter. For the first time, the diner didn't feel like a cage. Jax rose, offering a hand. Not to take, but to walk beside. In that whisper he'd cracked open a door to redemption, not just for her, but for the promise that had haunted him across 1,000 miles. Little did they know, this chance encounter was the spark that would draw his crew from the shadows, facing down the corruption that had long preyed on places like this, small-town greed masking deeper sins. But for now, in the quiet close of the night, it was enough. The desert night wrapped around the diner like a worn leather jacket, cool and unyielding, as Lena twisted the key in the lock with a final, resounding click. The neon sign buzzed one last time before Jax reached up and flicked the switch, plunging the facade into shadow. Streetlights from the empty highway cast long, jagged lines across the parking lot, where his Harley stood sentinel, its chrome flanks reflecting the moon like polished silver. Lena hesitated on the threshold, her hand still gripping the doorframe, the weight of her apron suddenly feeling like an anchor she'd carried too long. Jax's words lingered in the air between them, a quiet thunder that had shaken loose something deep inside her, a flicker of belief she'd long buried under layers of doubt and diner grease. He didn't push, didn't crowd her space. Instead, Jax leaned against the wall beside the door, pulling a pack of smokes from his vest pocket. The match flared briefly, illuminating the faint scars on his knuckles, souvenirs from bar fights and battlefield skirmishes alike. "No pressure, Lena," he said, exhaling a thin stream of smoke that curled toward the stars. "But I've got a room at the motel down the road. Figured you might need a breather from this place tonight." His eyes met hers, steady and unblinking, and the kind of look that said he'd seen enough broken souls to know when to offer shelter without strings. She nodded, surprising herself, and followed him across the lot. The gravel crunched under her sensible shoes, a stark contrast to the solid thud of his boots. The air smelled of sage and exhaust, the distant hum of semis on the interstate, a reminder that the world kept moving, even if she hadn't. As they walked, Jax shared more in that gravelly voice of his, fragments of a life pieced together from the road. "Lost my brother in the sands overseas," he admitted, the words rough but unadorned. "We made a pact, him and me, under fire one night. Said if one of us didn't make it, the other would keep riding for the ones left behind." The overlooked. The ones the system chews up and spits out. He paused, flicking ash into the wind. That promise, it's what keeps the Iron Vow together. My crew, veterans, wanderers, folks who've stared down the abyss. We don't ride for glory. We ride for the word we gave. Lena listened, her steps slowing as they reached the motel's faded sign, its letters peeling like old skin. The place was a squat, single-story affair, rooms lit by buzzing sodium lamps that painted everything in an orange glow. She hadn't planned on this, talking to a stranger, letting him see the cracks in her armor, but there was something in Jax's quiet honor that felt like a lifeline tossed into choppy waters. They settled into his room, the door creaking shut behind them. It was sparse. A sagging bed with a threadbare quilt, a nightstand scarred by cigarette burns, and a window overlooking the endless black of the desert. Jax brewed coffee from a dusty machine in the corner, the rich aroma filling the space, chasing away the chill. Seated on the edge of the bed, Lena wrapped her hands around the mug, the warmth seeping into her palms. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know me. For all you know, I'm just another waitress with a sob story." Jax sat across from her in a rickety chair, his massive frame making it groan in protest. He set his own mug down, leaning forward with elbows on knees, the leather of his jacket whispering against itself. "Because I see the fight in you, Lena. The way you hold your head up after those truckers tore into you. That's the same fire my brother had, the kind that doesn't flicker out, no matter the storm." As the night deepened, their conversation wove through the shadows, peeling back layers like pages from an old journal. Lena spoke of her own ghosts, a father who'd walked out when she was 12, leaving her to raise her younger sister on scraps and sheer will, the small-town whispers that followed her like smoke, judging her body before they knew her heart, the endless grind of shifts that paid just enough to keep the lights on but never enough to dream. Jax nodded, his face a map of understanding, sharing how the war had carved him hollow, how the Iron Vow had become his redemption, a brotherhood bound by oaths sworn in blood and brotherhood, not ink on paper. But as the clock on the wall ticked toward dawn, a shadow crept into the room. Jax's phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a message that made his jaw tighten. He glanced at it, then at Lena, his expression shifting from open to guarded. "Trouble?" she asked, sensing the change like a shift in the wind. He hesitated, rubbing a hand over his stubbled chin. "My crew's been tracking something out here. Whispers of a ring shaking down places like your diner. Extortion dressed up as protection. Small businesses getting squeezed until they break. Sound familiar?" Lena's stomach twisted. She'd heard rumors. Unexplained fees from local enforcers tied to the sheriff's office, debts that piled up like storm clouds. Last month, a fellow waitress had vanished after refusing to pay, her shift covered by a vague note about family emergency. No one asked questions in a town where silence was survival. Jack stood, pacing the worn carpet, his boots leaving faint imprints. "That promise I mentioned. It started with protecting folks from the wolves in sheep's clothing. If this is what I think, my brothers will ride in, but it means getting involved, deep." Lena rose too, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and fire. For the first time, the hollow inside her felt filled with purpose, not just pain. "Then let them come," she said, her voice steadier than she'd imagined. "I've been running from this fight too long." Outside, the first hints of dawn streaked the horizon, painting the desert in hues of pink and gold. Jax's phone buzzed again, insistent, pulling him toward the door. The Iron Vow was mobilizing, engines already revving in the distance, a convoy forming like thunder on the plains. Lena watched him, the whisper from the diner echoing in her mind, binding them in a fragile pact. But as he stepped out, a pair of headlights swept the lot unannounced, tires crunching gravel with ominous intent. Shadows moved behind the wheel, eyes glinting with recognition. The night, it seemed, wasn't done with them yet. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The headlights slice through the pre-dawn haze like accusatory fingers, pinning Jax and Lena in the motel's orange glow. The vehicle, a battered black SUV with tinted windows, eased to a stop at the lot's edge, its engine idling low and predatory, exhaust curling like smoke signals. Jax's hand instinctively went to his belt, fingers brushing the concealed holster beneath his jacket, a habit from nights when promises turned to peril. Lena froze beside him, the warmth of their shared coffee mugs forgotten, her pulse thundering in her ears. The desert air, once a gentle caress, now felt charged, heavy with the scent of impending rain and something sharper, trouble distilled. The driver's door creaked open, and a figure emerged, tall and lean, dressed in a rumpled sheriff's uniform that hung loose on his frame, badge catching the light like a false promise. Deputy Harlan Tate. Jax clocked him immediately from the buzzed hair and the sneer that twisted his thin lips. Tate wasn't family, not by blood or choice, but his name echoed in the whispers Jax's crew had gathered. A cog in the machine, squeezing dry every roadside stop from here to the state line. He sauntered forward, boots scuffing the gravel, one hand resting casually on the butt of his service pistol. "Harlan," Jax said, voice level but edged with gravel, stepping slightly in front of Lena. "Didn't peg you for the early riser type." Tate's eyes flicked to Lena, narrowing with recognition that curdled into disdain. "Jax Harlan, been hearing about you and your road rats sniffing around, and you," he added, jerking his chin at her, "should know better than to cozy up with strays. That diner's yours to run clean, or it'll be the last shift you clock." His words landed like weighted nets, pulling at the threads of fear Lena had only just begun to unravel. She straightened, chin lifting despite the tremor in her knees, the motel's flickering sign humming overhead like a swarm of angry bees. Jax didn't flinch, his stance a wall of quiet resolve, the kind forged in foxholes where words were as deadly as bullets. "We're just passing through, Deputy, but if you're here to collect on those protection fees your boss peddles, might want to rethink it. Folks talk, and my crew listens." Tate laughed, a dry bark that echoed off the stucco walls, but there was no humor in it, only the brittle edge of a man cornered by his own greed. He stepped closer, close enough for Lena to smell the stale coffee on his breath and the faint tang of sweat-soaked polyester. "Crew, bunch of has-beens on hogs, playing hero. You think riding in here changes anything? This town's got rules, and you ain't writing 'em." The tension coiled tighter, the distant rumble of approaching engines. Jax's phone had summoned them, vibrating through the ground like an underground storm. Lena's mind raced, fragments of her life flashing. The empty chair at her sister's graduation, the unpaid bills stacking like accusations. The way Tate's deputies had inspected the diner last week, leaving behind veiled threats wrapped in official clipboards. She'd paid the fee that time, scraping from her tips, but it had hollowed her further, a silent surrender to the corruption that choked small dreams. Now, with Jax's whisper still echoing in her soul, that hollow filled with a defiant spark. "Rules?" she said, her voice cutting the air sharper than she'd intended. "Like the ones that let you shake down working folks. I've had enough of your kind deciding what's wanted around here." Tate's face darkened, hand twitching toward his radio, but Jax's gaze held him, unyielding as desert rock. "Walk away, Harlan, before this gets messier than you bargained for." The deputy hesitated, eyes darting to the horizon where the first grey light bled into the sky, silhouetting a line of headlights emerging from the haze. Harleys, a dozen strong, their pipes growling like awakened beasts. The iron vow, answering the call of an old oath, riders cutting through the night for the overlooked. Tate spat on the gravel, a gesture of impotent rage, and backed toward his SUV. "This ain't over. You two just bought yourselves a one-way ticket to regret." The engine roared to life, tires spinning dust as he peeled away, taillights fading into the awakening dawn. Lena exhaled, the knot in her chest loosening just enough to breathe. But Jax's expression remained etched with caution. He turned to her, the morning light catching the silver in his hair, making him look like a sentinel carved from the landscape itself. "You all right?" he asked, voice softening, a hand hovering near her shoulder without touching, respecting the space she'd guarded for so long. She nodded, though her hands still shook, the adrenaline a bitter taste on her tongue. "Yeah, but he's right about one thing. This isn't over. Those fees, they've been bleeding the diner dry. If I don't pay next time, they'll shut me down, or worse." They moved back toward the room as the convoy pulled in, bikes forming a protective semicircle around the lot, engines cutting off in a symphony of silence. Riders dismounted, men and women with faces weathered by roads and regrets, vests patched with the iron vow emblem, a shield crossed by a chain, symbol of unbreakable bonds. One, a wiry woman named Riley with a ponytail streaked grey, approached Jax, her eyes sharp as she glanced at Lena. "Boss, we got word from the network. Tate's tied to a bigger fish, some developer out of the city, eyeing this stretch for a casino build. They're clearing out the little guys to make way. Your call from last night lit a fire. We're here to stand." Jax nodded, the weight of his brother's promise settling heavier on his shoulders, but shared now among kin chosen by fire. He looked to Lena, the dawn painting her features in soft gold, revealing the strength beneath her curves, the unyielding core that had served coffee and endured leers without breaking. "This fight's yours too if you want it," he said, the words a quiet vow, echoing the one that had drawn him here. "We don't ride for vengeance, we ride for the word given, the honor kept, against the wolves who hide behind badges." Lena met his gaze, the fear receding like tide, replaced by a resolve that felt like coming home. The diner waited across the road, its windows catching the rising sun, no longer a prison, but a battleground. "Then let's keep it," she replied, her voice steady, the whisper from the night before blooming into action. As the crew gathered, mapping their stand against the shadows encroaching on the horizon, the desert stirred awake, sagebrush whispering approval, the first birds calling like heralds. In that fragile alliance, redemption wasn't a distant dream, but a road unfolding, mile by mile, bound by loyalty's iron chain. The sun crested fully now, bathing the motel in relentless light, but the chill of the encounter lingered, a reminder that promises tested in the light burned brightest. Jax's crew fanned out, securing the perimeter with the quiet efficiency of those who'd faced worse than small-town tyrants. Lena watched from the doorway, her apron discarded like shed skin, feeling for the first time not just wanted, but essential, a piece in a larger mosaic of justice where the overlooked rose together. Yet, as the day unfolded, whispers of deeper corruption reached them. Tate's boss, the sheriff himself, with ties to vanished workers and fabricated debts. The vow would ride, but the cost loomed, demanding sacrifices that echoed Jax's old oath. For Lena, it was a new beginning, fragile as desert bloom, rooted in the honor of strangers turned family. The midday sun hammered down on the motel like a relentless interrogator, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage that distorted the horizon. Dust devils danced lazily across the empty lots, carrying the faint, acrid scent of sun-scorched earth and distant wildfires. Inside the motel's cramped office, borrowed for their makeshift war room, Jax's crew had transformed the space into a nerve center of quiet determination. Maps spread across a scarred wooden table, marked with red ink lines tracing the web of extortion from roadside diners to gas stations, all funneling toward a shadowy developer named Victor Kane. The air hummed with the low murmur of voices, veterans sharing intel, a former nurse named Clara sketching timelines of missing workers, Riley coordinating lookout shifts on her battered laptop. Jax stood at the head, his broad frame casting a long shadow, but his eyes kept drifting to Lena, who sat on the edge of a folding chair, her fingers tracing the rim of a styrofoam cup long gone cold. She'd never been part of something like this, a circle of strangers, bound not by blood but by unbreakable oaths, their faces a gallery of hard-won scars and unyielding resolve. The Iron Vow wasn't just a club. It was a living promise, born from Jax's brother's dying words in a far-off desert, expanded to shield the forgotten from the grind of systemic greed. Lena felt the pull of it, a gravitational force drawing her from the isolation of her diner shifts into this web of loyalty. Yet doubt gnawed at her edges, sharp as the creak of the office fan overhead. "What if this blows back on the town?" she asked, her voice cutting through the planning like a cool breeze. "People like me, we scrape by. If the sheriff comes down harder, it'll crush everyone." Jax met her gaze, the lines around his eyes deepening with a mix of empathy and steel. He'd carried that same question across 1,000 miles, weighing the cost of intervention against the hollow victory of silence. "That's the rub, Lena," he replied, his tone measured like gravel under tires. "Doing nothing lets the wolves feast. My brother taught me that, under stars that didn't care. He made me swear we'd stand for the ones who couldn't. This crew, we're his echo, but it ain't easy. Never is when honor's on the line." He paused, the weight of unspoken losses hanging between them, the faint tick of a wall clock marking time like a heartbeat. Clara nodded from across the table, her hands steady despite the tremor from an old injury. "We've lost riders before," she said softly, "but we've saved more. That's the math that matters." As the group mapped their next move, a subtle probe into the sheriff's office records, disguised as a routine supply run, Lena's phone buzzed on the table, shattering the focus. The screen lit with an unknown number, but the area code screamed local. She answered, the room falling silent, tension coiling like a spring. A gravelly voice slithered through the speaker. "Harper, you think hitching to that biker trash makes you untouchable? Drop the attitude, pay up by sundown, or your little diner's history, and don't think we won't find you." The line went dead, leaving a void filled only by the whir of the fan. Lena's face paled, the spark of resolve flickering under a wave of raw fear, the kind that whispered of empty rooms and vanished futures. Jax's jaw tightened, his hand closing into a fist on the map, crumpling the edge where the diner was pinned. "They're closing in," he muttered, the words a low growl that rippled through the crew. Riley leaned forward, her eyes flashing. "We hit back smart. I know a guy in county records, ex-vow, owes Jax a favor. We get proof of the payoffs, expose the chain to Kane. No guns, just truth." The plan solidified in hushed tones. Jax and Lena would lead a decoy ride to the diner, drawing eyes while two riders slipped into town hall under cover of the afternoon crowd. It was a gamble, threaded with the ethical tightrope of justice, uncovering corruption without becoming the chaos it bred. Lena rose, her curves shifting with purpose, no longer hidden, but armored in newfound grit. "I'm in," she said, the words tasting like desert rain, cleansing. "For the diner, for everyone they've hollowed out." They moved out as the sun dipped toward the jagged mountains, bikes roaring to life in a symphony of defiance, exhaust mingling with the dry scent of creosote bushes. Jax rode point, Lena behind him on a spare helmet-clad seat, her arms tentative at first around his waist, then firm as the wind whipped her hair. The highway blurred into a ribbon of heat haze, the diner's familiar outline emerging like a beacon. But as they pulled into the lot, gravel spraying under tires, a squad car idled across the street. Deputy Tate leaning against its hood, arms crossed, his smirk a blade in the fading light. He pushed off as they dismounted, sauntering over with the swagger of unchecked power. "Back already? Thought you'd run off with your knight in leathers." His eyes raked Lena, dismissive, then fixed on Jack's. "Word's out. Your little posse thinks they can play sheriff, but meddle, and you'll drag her down with you." The crew fanned out subtly, engines still warm, a wall of vests and stares that spoke volumes without a word. Jack stepped forward, his presence a quiet monolith, the sun glinting off his chain pendant, the vow's symbol, a reminder of oaths etched in loss. "We're not playing, Tate. We're ending it. Those fees, the missing folks, it stops. Hand over the books or we take this to lights brighter than yours." Tate's laugh was hollow, but sweat beaded on his brow, the moral fault line cracking under pressure. He glanced at his radio, then back, the dilemma twisting his features, loyalty to greed versus the inexorable pull of exposure. "You got no proof," he spat, but his voice wavered. The bluff thinning. Lena spoke then, her voice steady, carrying the weight of years silenced. "We don't need proof to know wrong from right. You've taken enough. Tips from my pocket, dreams from this town, but promises, they outlast badges." The words hung, poetic justice in the air thick with tension, as distant sirens wailed, a false alarm or the first thread unraveling. Tate backed toward his car, radio crackling with urgent static, his retreat a concession won not by force, but by the unyielding honor of those who chose to stand. As he drove off, tires kicking dust like fleeing shadows, the crew exhaled collectively, the diner's door swinging open to the promise of a reclaimed space. Inside, as Lena flipped the sign to open, the jukebox hummed back to life, a soft melody underscoring the fragile victory. Jax lingered by the counter, his whisper from that first night evolving into a bond forged in fire. The family chosen, rising against the tide, but deeper shadows loomed. Cain's reach extended further, pulling strings that threatened to ensnare them all. The vow would press on, redemption a road paved with sacrifice, loyalty the engine driving them forward into the gathering dusk. If this story is touching your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The dusk settled over the diner like a heavy curtain, painting the sky in bruised purples and fading oranges, the kind of light that softened edges but sharpened intentions. Inside, the air carried the comforting aroma of fresh coffee brewing and the sizzle of burgers on the grill, a deliberate normalcy that masked the undercurrent of resolve humming through the room. Lena moved behind the counter with renewed purpose, her hands steady as she poured refills for the few locals trickling in, farmers with calloused palms and weary eyes, seeking solace in pie and small talk. The jukebox played a low, twangy ballad about lost highways and second chances, its notes weaving through the conversations like threads in a tapestry of quiet defiance. Jack sat at his usual stool, nursing a mug that had gone cold, his gaze fixed on the window where the last rays glinted off the parked Harleys. The crew had dispersed strategically, Riley and Clara on watch at the motel's edge, their silhouettes blending with the lengthening shadows of the creosote bushes. A couple of riders scouting the back roads for any sign of Tate's reinforcements. The probe into the county records had yielded fragments, ledgers hinting at payoffs funneled to Cain's shell company, disguised as development incentives. It wasn't ironclad proof, but it was enough to stoke the fire of their oath. The iron vow's creed pulsing like the steady thrum of an engine at idle. Lena slid a slice of apple pie his way, the crust golden and flaky, steam rising in delicate wisps that caught the warm glow of the overhead lamps. "You eat like you're fueling for war," she said, a tentative smile breaking through, her voice laced with the warmth of their growing bond. Jax looked up, the corners of his mouth twitching in a rare half-grin, the lines on his face easing just a fraction. Wars are won on full stomachs, darling. And this is the kind of fight that needs all of us steady. He took a bite, the cinnamon-spiced filling a brief sweetness amid the grit, and for a moment the diner felt like a fortress, walls of faded wallpaper holding back the encroaching night. But the peace shattered with the screech of tires outside, a sound like nails on rusted metal. Heads turned as two squad cars pulled up, lights off, but sirens silent, their bulk dominating the lot like predators circling prey. The doors swung open, and out stepped Sheriff Elias Crow himself, a stout man in his late 50s, uniform straining at the seams, his face a mask of jowly authority, etched with the arrogance of unchecked power. Flanking him were Tate and another deputy, their postures rigid, hands hovering near holsters. Crow strode in, the bell above the door jingling mockingly, his boots thudding against the linoleum like judgments. The locals shifted uncomfortably, forks pausing mid-air, the ballad on the jukebox fading into an awkward hush. "Lena Harper," Crow drawled, his voice thick with the drawl of small-town supremacy, eyes scanning the room before locking on her. "Heard you've been entertaining some unsavory company. Care to explain why a simple waitress is consorting with a pack of road warriors?" He leaned on the counter, close enough for her to catch the sour whiff of cheap aftershave and authorities' rot. Lena's heart raced, but she held her ground, wiping her hands on her apron with deliberate calm, the same poise she'd mustered through years of leers and losses. "Just customers, Sheriff. Paying ones, unlike some who show up demanding free passes." Crow's laugh was a bark, devoid of mirth, as he straightened, his gaze sliding to Jax. "Harlan, your reputation precedes you. Iron vow, isn't it? Playing vigilantes in my town. We've got reports of interference. Folks saying you're stirring up trouble over nothing but rumors." Jax met his stare evenly, his broad shoulders squared, the chain around his neck glinting like a talisman of oaths, unbroken. He set his fork down with measured precision, the clink echoing in the tensed silence. "Rumors, like the ones about workers vanishing after they couldn't pay your fees, or how Kane's buying up land on the cheap with your signature sealing the deals? We're not stirring, Sheriff. We're shining a light." The words hung heavy, the diner's air thickening with unspoken accusations, the scent of cooling pie now cloying against the rising tension. Tate shifted, his earlier bravado cracking, fingers twitching as if itching for an excuse. Crow's face reddened, veins pulsing at his temples, but he masked it with a paternal smirk. "Big words from a drifter. This town's under my protection. You and your crew ride out by morning, or I'll find reasons to lock you all up, starting with her for aiding and abetting." He jabbed a finger toward Lena, the threat landing like a shadow over her reclaimed spark, stirring the old hollow of fear. Outside, engines rumbled to life, the vow responding, bikes forming a loose perimeter, headlights cutting through the twilight like beacons of solidarity. Riley's voice crackled over Jax's earpiece, low and urgent. "We've got eyes on a van heading this way. Kane's muscle, looks like. Hold the line." Jax nodded subtly, his mind racing through the ethical maze. Confrontation could escalate to signs of struggle, but retreat betrayed the promise that had pulled him from his ghosts. Lena stepped forward, her voice rising clear and unyielding, carrying the moral weight of a lifetime sidelined. "Protection. You've been the storm, Sheriff, twisting laws to crush folks like me. But promises, real ones like the kind Jax and his family keep, they weather more than your bluffs." Crow's eyes narrowed, the dilemma etching deeper lines on his face, greed warring with the dawning realization that exposure loomed larger than his badge. He glanced at Tate, who avoided his gaze, the chain of corruption fraying under the pressure of truth's quiet advance. "This isn't your fight, girl," he growled, But the words lacked conviction, the room's collective breath holding as the distant van's lights pierced the dusk. With a curt nod to his deputies, Crow turned on his heel, the bell jingling his retreat, squad cars peeling away into the gathering dark, leaving dust devils in their wake. The diner exhaled, patrons murmuring approval, the jukebox kicking back to life with a defiant tune. Lena locked eyes with Jax, the bond between them solidifying like cooled steel, a partnership born of whispers and widened into a stand for justice. But as the crew regrouped inside, maps refolded with new urgency. Word came of Kane's approach, a direct confrontation at dawn, his enforcers ready to claim the land by force if words failed. The night stretched ahead, laced with the scent of sage and impending sacrifice, the iron vows, loyalty, the unbreaking shield against the tide. Redemption hovered on the horizon, not as a solitary path, but a convoy, engines ready to roar for the honor of the overlooked. The first blush of dawn crept over the desert like a hesitant promise, staining the eastern sky in soft pinks and golds that clashed with the lingering shadows of night. The air hung crisp and cool, carrying the sharp tang of dew-kissed sagebrush and the faint, metallic bite of engine oil from the assembled Harleys lining the diner's lot. Their chrome frames caught the light in fleeting glimmers, a silent armada poised on the edge of revelation. Inside, the Iron Vow had gathered one last time, the counter serving as a makeshift strategy table, strewn with coffee mugs and scribbled notes. The aroma of strong brew mingled with the subtle earthiness of worn leather vests, grounding the tension that thrummed through the room like a low-frequency hum. Jack stood at the window, arms crossed over his broad chest, his silhouette framed against the awakening horizon. The weight of his brother's oath pressed on him heavier than ever, a vow to shield the lost, now manifesting in this dusty standoff against Kane's empire of shadows. Lena moved beside him, her presence a steady anchor. The curves she'd once hidden now carried with the quiet confidence of someone who'd chosen to step into the light. She'd traded her apron for a borrowed vow jacket, its patches a badge of the family she'd stumbled into, warm against the morning chill seeping through the cracks. "You think he'll show?" she asked, her voice soft but threaded with steel, eyes tracing the empty highway where dust motes danced in the early beams. "He will," Jax replied, his gravelly tone laced with certainty, born of too many dawns like this. "Men like Kane don't back down from a claim. But we don't meet greed with force. We meet it with the truth, the kind that exposes the rot." He turned to her, his hand brushing hers briefly, a gesture of solidarity that echoed the whisper from their first night, now amplified into a shared resolve. The crew nodded in agreement, faces etched with the scars of past redemptions, Riley's sharp eyes scanning a final radio check, Clara folding away medical kits with hands that had mended more than wounds. They were the chosen kin, bound not by fate but by honor's unyielding chain, ready to stand for the overlooked without drawing blood. The rumble started distant, a growl swelling from the west like thunder rolling in from unseen storms. Headlights pierced the haze first, a convoy of sleek black vans and sedans, tires humming over the cracked asphalt, kicking up veils of dust that swirled like vengeful spirits. At the lead was Kane himself, stepping from a polished Escalade with the swagger of a man who owned the horizon. Tall and impeccably suited, his silver hair slicked back, he exuded the polished veneer of corporate conquest, but his eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed the predator beneath. Flanking him were a half-dozen enforcers, broad-shouldered types in dark jackets, their postures coiled but restrained, hands empty, as if violence were a tool too crude for their employer's taste. Kane approached the diner's threshold, pausing under the flickering neon sign that now seemed a relic of battles past. The bell chimed softly as he pushed the door open, the sound slicing the quiet like a blade. The crew held position inside, a wall of quiet defiance, while Jax and Lena met him at the counter. The air thickened with the scent of his expensive cologne, clashing against the diner's homespun warmth, cinnamon from the pie cooling nearby, the faint steam of fresh pots. "Mr. Harlan," Kane began, his voice smooth as oiled silk, ignoring Lena at first. "I've heard you're stirring up my little project. This stretch of road? It's prime for progress, a casino that brings jobs, lights up this godforsaken waste. Your interference is regrettable." Jax's gaze didn't waver, steady as the desert floor. "Progress built on broken backs ain't progress, Kane. We've got the ledgers, payoffs to the sheriff, debts fabricated to scare folks off their land. Workers gone after they pushed back. You call that development. We call it theft, wrapped in suits." He slid a folder across the counter, copies of the records Riley's contact had unearthed, pages crisp under the fluorescent hum. Kane's composure flickered, a muscle twitching in his jaw as he flipped through them. The weight of exposure settling like dust after a storm. Lena stepped forward then, her voice rising clear and resonant, carrying the moral poetry of a life reclaimed. "This diner, it's not just a stop. It's home for people like me, scraping by on promises we make to ourselves and each other. You've hollowed out this town, turning loyalty into leverage. But real promises, they endure. They bring folks together, not tear them down." Her words landed with quiet force, the crew murmuring assent behind her. Their presence a living testament to chosen family, the veterans who'd traded war for watchfulness, the wanderers who'd found purpose in protection. Kane's enforcers shifted uneasily, the ethical suspense coiling tighter, their boss's empire suddenly fragile under the glare of dawn's truth. Kane closed the folder with deliberate slowness, his face a mask cracking at the edges. The dilemma etched deep, greed's empire versus the inexorable tide of justice, where integrity outlasted intimidation. Outside, the first rays fully illuminated the lot, casting long shadows that seemed to retreat from the light. "You think this changes anything?" he said, but his tone wavered, the bluff eroded by the unyielding honor arrayed before him. Jax leaned in, voice low and final. "It changes everything. Ride out clean, or the truth goes wider, state investigators, the press. Your call, but the vow keeps its word. Always." The silence stretched, broken only by the distant call of a roadrunner slicing the morning calm. Kane straightened, signaling his men with a curt nod, the folder tucked under his arm like a surrendered flag. No shots fired, no chaos unleashed, just the poetic victory of exposure, the corruption laid bare without a fist raised. As the convoy reversed, engines fading into the haze, the diner filled with a collective breath, the air lighter, scented now with possibility and the sweet promise of rain on the wind. Lena turned to Jax, her eyes shining with the dawn's glow. The hollow within her filled not by want, but by worth, the redemption of standing tall beside those who saw her whole. The crew embraced the moment, claps on backs and shared nods, forging tighter the bonds of their oath. Jax's brother's promise, once a solitary chain, had become a convoy's roar, echoing across the miles for every overlooked soul. The highway stretched open before them, not an end but an invitation to more roads, where loyalty's quiet actions rippled into legacies of honor. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the desert in unrelenting warmth, Lena flipped the sign to open once more, the chime welcoming a new day. Jax lingered, his hand finding hers, the whisper from that fateful night evolved into a lifetime's vow. In the heart of nowhere, they'd built something unbreakable, a family chosen, justice moral, redemption hard-won. Thank you for riding this journey with us. If these tales of honor and quiet courage touched your soul, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll keep the stories coming mile after mile.